It had been 100 years since I tore out the heart of the Draugr. 100 years of killing, fighting, and feeding. 100 years since I realized my power was beyond anything my sire had ever imagined. I had grown stronger, faster, more ruthless. And with each kill, with each creature that fell beneath my claws, the hunger for more gnawed at me, relentless, insatiable. I was done serving. The halls of the stronghold were silent, the air heavy with the stench of old blood. I moved like a shadow, unseen, unheard, as I made my way through the labyrinth of corridors. My eyes flicked over the guards, their armor dull, their eyes lifeless. They didn't expect anything. They were comfortable, complacent. My sire's rule had made them soft, but I wasn't soft. I reached the first chamber, my hand hovering over the door. Inside were two of my sire's most loyal servants, vampires who had been by his side for centuries. They would be the first to die. I pushed open the door, stepping into the dimly lit room. They didn't even have time to react. I was on them in an instant, my claws slicing through flesh and bone with ease. The first one's head hit the floor with a sickening thud, his body crumpling before he even realized he was dead. The second one managed to let out a strangled gasp before I drove my fist into his chest, ripping out his heart in a spray of blood. I let the heart fall to the floor, the blood pooling around my feet. It was quick, brutal, and efficient, just the way I liked it. I moved through the stronghold, leaving a trail of death in my wake. Every guard, every servant that crossed my path met the same fate. Claws ripping through flesh, bones snapping, blood splattering across the cold stone floors. Each kill was more satisfying than the last, the thrill of it surging through my veins like fire. They were weak. All of them. The next chamber held more of my sire's loyal followers. I could hear them talking, their voices low and complacent. They were unaware of the massacre unfolding in their own home. I stepped into the room, the scent of their blood hitting me like a wave, intoxicating, overwhelming. I moved faster than they could see. In seconds, the room was painted red, their bodies torn apart, limbs strewn across the floor. One of them tried to crawl away, his legs severed at the knees, but I was on him before he could reach the door. I grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground, his blood pouring from the open wounds on his legs, soaking the floor beneath him. "Please," he choked, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes wide with terror. I smiled, my fangs glinting in the dim light. There is no mercy here. With a swift motion, I tore out his throat, the blood spraying across the walls as I dropped his lifeless body to the floor. The massacre continued. Room after room, chamber after chamber. I slaughtered them all. Their blood soaked the walls, the floors, even the ceilings. Their bodies left broken and twisted in my wake. It was chaos. It was destruction. It was beautiful. By the time the night was over, the stronghold was a graveyard, littered with the remains of my sire's once loyal followers. I stood in the center of it all, my chest heaving, my hands drenched in blood. It wasn't enough. I would need more. Let the rumors spread. Let them know that I had come for the throne. I wanted them to fear me. I needed them to fear me. And soon, my sire would know. I would take everything from him. His power, his throne, his life. This was only the beginning. The fortress loomed in the distance, its jagged towers silhouetted against the dark sky. My sire's stronghold. It had stood for centuries, an impenetrable fortress of stone and blood, guarded by his loyal sentinels and ancient wards. But tonight, it would fall. The wind howled around me as I made my way toward the gates, the scent of blood thick in the air. My body was still covered in the gore of those I had already slaughtered, their lifeless eyes staring into nothingness, their corpses left broken and discarded. It wasn't enough. Not yet. The sentinels guarding the gate were the first to fall. They never even saw me coming. I moved through them like a shadow, faster than they could react, my claws slicing through their throats, their blood splattering across the cold stone walls. They crumpled to the ground, their bodies twitching as the life drained from them. I pushed open the gates, stepping into the courtyard. The air was thick with tension, the silence oppressive. They knew I was coming. I could feel their fear, their hesitation. It was intoxicating. And then, the battle began. The sentinels poured out from the towers, their eyes burning with hatred, their swords glinting in the faint light of the moon. They came at me in waves. their movements precise, calculated. But they were no match for me. I tore through them with ease, my claws ripping through flesh and bone, their screams echoing through the night. Blood sprayed across the courtyard, pooling at my feet, staining the stone red. One by one, they fell, their bodies broken, their blood painting the walls. A sentinel lunged at me from the side, his sword aimed at my heart. I caught the blade with my hand, the metal slicing into my palm, but I didn't flinch. I ripped the sword from his grip and drove it through his chest, the sound of his ribs cracking like music to my ears. He gasped, blood bubbling from his mouth, his eyes wide with shock as I twisted the blade, tearing through his heart. I pulled the sword free, watching as he crumpled to the ground, his blood soaking the dirt beneath him. More came, their eyes filled with rage, their weapons raised high. I welcomed them, my fangs bared in a savage grin. The courtyard became a slaughterhouse. Bodies littered the ground, their limbs twisted, their heads severed. The air was thick with the stench of death, the sound of battle ringing in my ears. I reveled in it, the thrill of the fight surging through me, my hunger growing with every kill. A hulking creature emerged from the shadows, its body twisted and monstrous, its skin covered in jagged scars. One of my sire's creations, warped by dark magic, designed to be the perfect killing machine. It let out a low, guttural growl as it charged at me, its massive fists swinging through the air. I ducked beneath its blow, moving with inhuman speed, and drove my claws into its chest. The creature howled in pain, its black blood oozing from the wound, but it didn't stop. It grabbed me by the throat, lifting me off the ground, its grip like iron. I snarled, my claws digging deeper into its flesh, tearing through muscle and bone. The creature's grip tightened, but I didn't relent. I ripped my hand free, my claws tearing its heart from its chest in one swift motion. The creature collapsed, its body convulsing as it hit the ground, its blood pooling around it. I stood over its corpse, my chest heaving, the taste of its blood still fresh on my lips. More sentinels emerged from the towers, their eyes wide with fear as they took in the carnage. I could see the hesitation in their movements, the way their hands trembled as they gripped their weapons. They were afraid. And they had every right to be. I tore through them like paper, my claws shredding their flesh, my fangs sinking into their throats. Blood sprayed across the walls, the ground, the very air itself. I was a force of nature, unstoppable, unrelenting. The fortress walls shook with the weight of the battle, the stone crumbling beneath my feet. I could feel the magic in the air, the ancient wards that protected the stronghold trembling under the weight of my power. They wouldn't hold for much longer. The fortress was falling, crumbling beneath my hands. And soon, I would be standing in front of my sire's throne, ready to take what was mine. By the time the last sentinel fell, the courtyard was nothing more than a graveyard. The bodies of my enemies strewn across the ground, their blood soaking the earth. The walls were painted red, the air thick with the stench of death. I stood at the entrance to the throne room, my body covered in blood, my fangs bared in a savage grin. I had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The throne room was dark, save for the faint flicker of torchlight that danced along the stone walls. The heavy wooden doors creaked as I pushed them open, stepping into the final chamber. Blood still dripped from my hands, pooling on the floor as I advanced. The stench of death clung to me, thick and suffocating, but I relished it. I welcomed it. At the far end of the room, seated upon a throne carved from blackened bone, was my sire. His eyes glowed red, burning like embers in the darkness. He had known this moment would come. He had known the second I had killed his sentinels, slaughtered his loyal followers, that I would come for him. He did not rise from his throne, but his lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. "You've grown bold, Valen," he said, his voice smooth as silk, but dripping with malice. "But boldness does not make you invincible." "I don't need to be invincible," I replied, my voice a low growl. "I just need to be stronger than you." His smile widened, showing the tips of his fangs. "Then come and see how strong you really are." I didn't need to be told twice. I lunged at him, moving faster than any mortal eye could follow. My claws slashed through the air, aimed at his throat, but he was ready. He moved with the grace of centuries of experience, his hand darting up to catch my wrist mid-strike. The force of his grip sent a sharp jolt of pain through my arm, but I snarled and twisted free, driving my fist toward his chest. He blocked the blow with ease, his strength far greater than I had expected. His hand shot forward, slamming into my chest with enough force to send me flying backward. I hit the ground hard, the stone cracking beneath me as I slid across the floor. Before I could regain my footing, he was on me. His claws raked across my face, tearing through flesh and muscle, blood splattering across the cold stone. I let out a roar of fury, the pain sharp and searing, but I wouldn't be defeated. Not like this. I kicked out, my foot connecting with his side, sending him stumbling back. I used the momentum to launch myself at him, my claws sinking deep into his arm. I ripped through flesh and bone, blood gushing from the wound as I tore his arm nearly clean off. But still, he fought. His fist collided with my side, cracking ribs, sending a burst of agony through my body. We clashed again, fists and claws meeting in a blur of violence. The walls shook with the force of our blows, the throne room becoming a battlefield of blood and ruin. His strength was immense, centuries of power behind every strike, but I could feel it. The slight hesitation in his movements, the weight of his age slowing him down. I would exploit that. I moved in, faster than before, my claws raking across his chest, tearing through his armor and flesh alike. Blood poured from the wounds, thick and dark, soaking his once pristine robes. He growled, his eyes burning with fury as he lashed out with a strike that nearly took my head clean off. I ducked beneath it, driving my fist into his ribs with enough force to shatter bone. He staggered, blood dripping from his mouth as he snarled in rage. His hand shot out, gripping my throat, lifting me off the ground as he slammed me into the wall with enough force to crack the stone. I gasped, my vision blurring as his grip tightened, crushing my windpipe. "You are nothing without me," he hissed, his voice venomous, his fangs bared in a snarl. "I made you, Valen, and I will unmake you." With a roar of fury, I drove my claws into his side, tearing through muscle and bone, digging for his heart. His grip loosened just enough for me to break free, and I fell to the ground, gasping for air as I scrambled to my feet. We circled each other, blood dripping from both of us, staining the floor beneath us. The battle had taken its toll, but I could see the weariness in his eyes, the slow, labored way he moved. He was weakening, and I would not stop. I lunged again, this time with everything I had. My claws sank deep into his chest, tearing through his ribs, reaching for his heart. He let out a choked gasp, his eyes wide with shock as I gripped his still beating heart in my hand. "This is mine now," I growled, and with one final, savage motion, I ripped his heart from his chest. The room fell silent. He collapsed to his knees, blood pouring from the gaping wound in his chest. His eyes met mine, filled with disbelief, with anger, and with something that almost looked like pride. Then he was gone. I stood over his corpse, his heart still clutched in my hand, the blood dripping down my arm. I squeezed, feeling the organ crumble beneath my grip, the last vestiges of his power slipping away. The throne was mine now,